Just a reminder, this is our 7th session now. So if you've missed any of our past sessions, we do have the recordings of them on our YouTube channel. So there is a link to it at the end of your handout that goes directly to the little playlist that has all of the previous 6 videos. We're recording today's session, so if you do need to leave early or want to rewatch any part of it, it will be on our YouTube channel later tonight. So today we are talking all about military records. Again, I'm Katie Stilp. I'm the local history librarian at the Appleton Public Library. And I invite you to email me, or if you guys have questions, feel free to raise your hand throughout. I also have kind of stopping times throughout where I'm happy to try to answer any questions. Of course, I don't know everything, or try my best, especially with military records. It's just such a very broad topic that if I know it, I'll let you know, but if not, I may need to follow up with you, or we might need to investigate together to learn the answer. So with that being said, we cannot cover everything related to military records. I mean, this class is scheduled for an hour and a half. I usually go long because I like to fill in a ton of stuff. But even so, this is just a brief overview of some of the records that you can get for your veteran ancestors. We're going to mostly cover those major US involved wars, or resources where you can find a lot of veterans from different wars, not necessarily all in the Civil War or all in the Revolutionary War. Of course, each of the wars could be their own presentation. I mean, I could do a whole Civil War veterans presentation and it would be an hour and a half. So again, we can just cover a little bit of some of the resources, but I do have additional resources in your handout for you. So use that as a starting point. And like I've shown you in a few of our past classes, I always start with the Family Search Wiki. When I start to search a certain war or a specific location, it also is a really great starting point for giving you a little brush up, like what was the Civil War about, or what was the Revolutionary War about, or the War of 1812. If you're a little fuzzy on that, because it's obviously been a little bit of time since you've learned that in history class, this is a great starting point. And it also links you to some of the main records that are available online in regards to veterans for that war. It's also a really great starting point if you have an ancestor who served in a non-US military. So perhaps you have a German ancestor and they served with the German military. Maybe that's where you'd want to start to learn a little bit more about how to access those records or if they're even available. So I'll just show you quickly. You would go to the Family Search Wiki. Again, this link is in your handout. And what you would do is you would search a specific thing like Civil War. You can type that in and you can see all this information on getting started with Civil War research. So it's going to kind of lay out some of the resources that are available, all these links that you can click on to explore or learn more. There's all these research tips and strategies, walks you through all the states that were involved in it, all that kind of fun stuff. And if you know, hey, I have an ancestor who served with a Wisconsin unit in the Civil War, you can click on that state, and then it will bring you a little bit more in depth into Wisconsin's role in the Civil War, for example. So again, you can do this with any war, any genealogy topic, but basically you can search in the Family Search Wiki. So this is kind of a really good starting point to learn specifically a little bit more about what your ancestors' involvement was or what records are available other than what we cover today. So the availability of records is going to vary, of course, depending on what war we're talking about, the different branches of service as well. Some records are still locked for privacy reasons or require some proof of relation to access them. So kind of the general rule is if your veteran ancestor was discharged more than 62 years ago, so today's date in 1962, that means it's an archived record. So that means it's open to the public and you don't need to have any proof that says, hey, that's my grandpa or my great grandpa or whoever it is. If it's been 62 years since they've been discharged, then you are able to access it. And this is a rolling date. So today's date in 1962, if they were discharged today, you'd be able to access that record, but you'd have to wait till tomorrow to access somebody's record who was discharged tomorrow on this date in 1962. It also, if your ancestor served more than one time, it's the last date that they served. So if they served for a little bit in the Korean War and then went to the Vietnam War or served during peacetime, it would be that last discharge date of when they stopped completely. So you wouldn't be able to get part of their records. You'd have to wait until that 62 years is up to get their full record, unless you prove that you're related to them. So you can start your search online, and I'm going to show you a lot of really great online resources today. But especially for military records, the vast majority of records are going to be offline because there's just millions and billions of records, of course. Think of all the people who have served our country since the beginning of the United States. There's a lot of records available, but most of them are going to be offline, and they're going to be through the National Archives or the National Personnel Records Center, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. But before you start diving into, okay, how do I get all these records and where do I go to get these records? You really need to determine, hey, did my ancestor for sure serve in the war? Or did they serve in a specific branch of the Army or military? So you need to have some details, like, did they serve with the Navy? Did they serve with the Air Force? Did they serve just with the General Army? What unit or what regiment were they a part of? Where did they serve from? When did they serve from? So you need to start getting some of those details before you just say, hey, I know my ancestor's a Civil War veteran. You can't just, search all the Civil War records hoping to find them, because it's going to be a difficult search for you if you don't have more details on them. So there's this handy dandy chart. There's also a link in your handout to a family search chart that's similar to this, but it has a few more wars listed. So it kind of gives an overview of the different birth years for different people, and then what years those battles would have happened. So for example, if you have an ancestor who was born between 1726 and 1767, they possibly could have served in the Revolutionary War. So of course, those really far back ancestors that you're not sure if they're a veteran or not, look at those approximate birth years that you might have for them to determine what war they potentially would have served in. And of course, this is just a general overview. Of course, people maybe from 1768 might have also served. You just never know. So if they're kind of close to that cutoff, I would look just to be, certain that they are in there or not in there. So again, this is kind of just a general overview of what birth years those ancestors had and during what years those battles were. And again, the link that's in your handout gives you a couple more wars, because of course this one only goes up to the Vietnam War. And there's other wars within here that are a little bit smaller as well. The Mexican War, it would be 1796 to 1831 for birth years, and the battles happened between 1846 and 1848. And again, we're recording this, so you can feel free to pull it up online. And then again, there's that link in the handout, which would bring you to the listing of all of these as well. So if you don't yet know what regiment or what unit, what branch of service, or when they served, I want you to first start looking at your existing genealogy research that you've done up until this point. So some records that you might want to check would be like their obituary or other newspaper articles. So a couple months ago, we talked all about newspaper research. So hopefully you found some of those great newspaper articles or obituaries. Maybe it mentions this person was part of the GAR, or they lived in the veterans home, excuse me, or they were a DAR member. That means that they were a descendant of a veteran. Excuse me. So as you can see from this example, this is my fourth great grandfather, and right away in the headline for his obituary, it says old veteran. That's a pretty big clue that, hey, he was a veteran and I want to research his service. So if you read a little bit further, it says, oh, he was an old Civil War veteran. And it says what company and what unit he would have served in. So he served in Company G of the Wisconsin 14th. So now I know that's where I'm going to start my search to learn a little bit more about his service, when he served specifically with that unit. Of course, if you are not remembering all of our newspaper research stuff, or you missed that session, definitely go back and watch that video to learn all about the different newspaper resources that you can try to locate obituaries or articles related to your veteran services. You also might even be able to learn about their service while they're actually in it, like especially during World War II, you get a lot of like notes from the front lines, from people who are in service and writing back to their families, and then they're publishing little snippets of what's going on with them in the local newspaper. So that's also something that you might be able to find while they're in service. Their tombstone also might hold some clues for you. So maybe you'll find some symbols or some medals or some medallions or a special plaque that would indicate that they served in the military. This isn't always a guarantee, so not all veterans have these. So Ira Holmes, we just saw his obituary, he does not have any sort of marker on his tombstone saying he was a Civil War veteran, unfortunately. But thankfully, some other Civil War veterans do have a special tombstone just like this one. This is another one of my ancestors. It says he was a corporal in Company D of the 47th Illinois Infantry. So sometimes right there it says, again, what service they would have had or what unit they would have served in. You might find some sort of flag or medal, like this one's for a Revolutionary War veteran, for example. So those are usually not on the stone. They might be like in the ground right next to the stone. Unfortunately, people can easily move these then. So just because you see one next to your ancestor's tombstone, I would go and verify for sure that that person's a Revolutionary War soldier, for example, because somebody could have moved it, unfortunately. Or when they were cutting the grass, maybe they moved it and didn't put it back right. One great resource to check is called Find Grave. So it's this worldwide listing of all these graves. So maybe it shows a photo of your grave site or, excuse me, I'm gonna lose my voice today. There's also a spot on Find a Grave where you can indicate if that person's a veteran or not. This is something new that Find a Grave has been doing. Or maybe there's a spot in that written information on Find a Grave that mentions something about their military service. So just for an example, I'm going to show you. If you go to Find a Grave, I'm going to type in my great-grandpa because I know he was a veteran. And you can see he is listed right here. You can see there's a little V right next to it. So that indicates a veteran status. But just if there is no V, don't assume that that means he wasn't a veteran, because it's something new that they've been rolling out. And maybe the person who created this memorial did not put that on there or hasn't gone back and changed it. So right away, even if I didn't see that veteran, I can see in his picture, which I uploaded, of course, it shows him in his Navy uniform. So I know, of course, he served. But then there's also a picture of his extra kind of military tombstone that lists his military information that he was in the Navy during World War II. So now I know I need to research the Navy in World War II to see if I can locate him. Again, there might be some sort of biographical information in here that lists more about his service, depending on whoever created this page and what information they decided to put on here. So not everybody is on here. And of course, all the information on here is put on by somebody else, like a researcher like you and I. So you want to kind of always verify everything that you find on here, of course. Don't take it as 100% fact. You use this as a hint to then find some records to verify that. So again, always verify those, even if it's written in stone, even if it says, oh, he was a corporal, you want to verify that information, or it says what unit he was in, you want to verify that information. Census records. So again, we talked about census records a couple months ago. So feel free to refer back to that recording if you missed it, or rewatch it to remind yourself how to get to the census and all the fun stuff the census lists. Unfortunately, only men were asked about their military service, even in the 1950 census, which is our most recent census that we have access to. So pretty much every census, you have some sort of column that asks about military service. There was also a special veterans and widows census in 1890. So if you remember 1890, that's when the federal census burned and most of it is gone. Thankfully, most of this or part of this survived. So if you have an ancestor who is living in a state that alphabetically was after Kansas, you're lucky, because all the ones from Alabama to Kansas, unfortunately, were burned. So like my Illinois ancestors, for example, I do not have them in this 1890 special census because that was in the alphabetical listing of the I's, which is before K. It's burned. But those Wisconsin ancestors, that still survives. So you can see right here is a Wisconsin one. And it lists that Civil War service. It says he was a private. Let's see, I can zoom into it here quick. So if we go into this 1890 census, this is from Appleton. So this is Ira Holmes, who we saw earlier. So you can zoom in and you can see right up here, it lists his name, that he's a private in Company G of the 14th Regiment with Wisconsin. It says what date he enlisted, which is really helpful. It says what date he was discharged. There's also a spot for length of service, but for whatever reason, that person doing the census didn't feel like doing all the math in their head, so they left that column blank. There's also a second part to this, though. So you see there's a number over here. It says number 42. That means I come down here, I look at line 42, and it gives me his address. And it also has a column listing their disability. So if they have any sort of disability that they perhaps got during their service, for example, it says he had a crippled arm. Now I know, hey, he probably got a pension for that disability. Now I know I want to look into the Civil War pensions for him and see if I'm able to get some more information. Then there's the column for any sort of remarks. So it could be anything else that maybe they shared that the census taker decided to put on there. So again, this gives really great information on those Civil War veterans and on the widows of the veterans as well. So sometimes you'll see widow of so-and-so instead of the actual veteran's name, because that means they've actually passed away at that point. Some death records also ask if it's a veteran or not, but usually it's just a yes or no question. It doesn't give any additional information, but at least you know, hey, they're a veteran. I need to see if I can find some more information on what service they would have had. Maybe you have some sort of paperwork or artifacts that have been passed down to you. Maybe you've got some discharge paperwork, or I inherited my grandpa's army belt and my other grandpa's Navy trunk. So I know I have these cool artifacts from their service, and from hearing family stories, I know a little bit more and can then use that information to start researching. Maybe you've got some great photos of them in their uniform or them later in their life. So for example, this is Ira Holmes again. I got this photo from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. It was when he was a little older, not during his Civil War service, but you can see right here, he's got this little pin on his shirt. It's a GAR pin. So the GAR is the Grand Army Republic. It is a Civil War veterans organization that all Civil War veterans could have been involved in if they wanted to, and they did certain things around their community. And so you can see this is a indicating that he was a Civil War veteran. I would then research some more to know, hey, I want to find out more about his service. Again, if you've got any family stories, maybe you've heard, hey, he was on the USS Ward. What's the USS Ward and why is that important? And when was his service on the USS Ward? And, maybe go and start researching based on that family story that you have heard to confirm or deny what you've been told. Because of course, not every story is 100%. Yeah.
You're curious about what year that might have been taken. Is that his original uniform? Because obviously he's older than when he would have served. Is that something that is easy to find, or?
So this from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, I believe it said 1901 if I'm remembering correctly. So certain GAR posts did certain photos at certain times of their veterans who were part of the post at that time. Thankfully, this is one from the Appleton area where he was a GAR member, and they digitized the photos and put them on the Wisconsin Veterans Museum website, so I easily could find it. I'll show you a little bit later how I found this online too as well. So if you have a Wisconsin veteran or somebody who is affiliated with Wisconsin, you're in luck because we have a really great resource in the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. So again, remember, when you're starting your research, your first goal was you're looking at those existing research that you've already done already, what branch, what unit, what regiment they were part of, and approximately when they would have served. So for example, I would want something like Company D of the 47th Illinois Infantry, and then I would know what to search. There's also service numbers. Sorry. Oh, my voice is going to be a problem today. I'm going to try my best. So if you can locate a service number for your veteran, that's also going to help you be able to locate them. Service numbers began in World War I. So if you have any paperwork from any veterans that served from World War I to more current wars, if you have that service number, that's really going to help you find them. I'll show you in a couple documents that I have in just a minute, some examples of where you can find that service number in those records. If you can't locate that unit or that branch or that regiment that they were a part of or when they approximately served, there are tons of databases, there are tons of rosters and online resources that we're going to talk about today where you might be able to find that information. There is also stuff that's available offline that you might be able to investigate to learn a little bit more. So maybe they're in books at the library, or maybe you'll be able to find them online, that they're a digitized book, for example. Or maybe it's some sort of searchable database where you can just put in that name of that veteran and learn more. It's going to vary depending on the war and depending on what location they would have served with. So there's resources for all the different wars, all the different states that served in those wars. WorldCat is a really great resource for learning about what resources might exist for certain places, certain wars. So you want to search for certain keywords to try to find materials. So for example, I'm like, oh, I have an ancestor who he lived in Ohio. He was a part of the War of 1812. How do I find out more about his service? I have no clue where to start. So I would search something like the Ohio War of 1812 roster in WorldCat. Only use quotation marks for the exact thing. So you can see right here, the first result, rosters of Ohio militia in the War of 1812, where I've got American prisoners of war during the War of 1812. You can see various resources, rosters of Ohio soldiers in the War of 1812. So anytime you see something like, hey, I think I want to research this and see if I can find my ancestor, go ahead and click on it. So right here, it's going to give you a listing of the libraries. Make sure you have all libraries selected and not just featured libraries. So it will give you all the libraries. And it's going to give them geographically where you are. So it's going to give you the closest one. So it looks like Brown County Library is the closest one to Appleton that has it. Milwaukee has it, Wisconsin Historical Society, et cetera, et cetera. But something else you can also do is take this title. So I'm going to take this title and then I'm going to search some of the online resources that I know. So one of the online resources I know is called HathiTrust. They digitize a lot of great books, especially historic ones. So I'm going to take that title and I'm going to put it in here and I'm going to click search. And you can see, look at roster of Ohio soldiers in the War of 1812. And if it says full view, that's really great because that means I can look through this whole entire book. So now I can go page by page and look through this book, or usually over here on the left-hand side, there's a button that says search in this text. And then you can type in your ancestor's name, for example. So I usually just put in the surname, and then it's going to show me the results that that surname happens on. So you can click on it to be brought to that page. And you can see right there, it lists, or it highlights that name. So right here, it's highlighting that name. And then I would see, oh, he's a private in this certain regiment or unit that I'd want to then research a little bit more, for example. So again, they've digitized books from all the different wars, all the different states. I mean, you never know what you're going to find online, and this is just one of the resources available that you can search. If it didn't have that available online, though, I'd look at that library that's closest to me. Maybe there's not a super close library to you, and maybe it's the Wisconsin Historical Society or some other library outside of state. I would give them a call and say, hey, can you check this book? See if you can find this name and see if they're able to do that for you. Most libraries will freely do that for you, and maybe even send you a copy in an email of that page that your ancestor is in. I've got a couple listings of some digital libraries I'd searched for. So there's the Family Search Digital Library, the Digital Public Library of America, HathiTrust, Google Books, and Internet Archive. I've got links to all of those in your handout. And if you were in last month's session on city directories, I showed some live demonstration of how to use these sites. So that's why I'm not going to go through them all again because we have so much more to cover. But you can refer back to that recording from last month to watch demonstrations on how to use those sites. Some things you can also request to interlibrary loan. So some things, libraries that own it will send it up here to Appleton. You'd come to me at Appleton and say, hey, I want this title of this book. We would reach out to the library that owns it and see if they're willing to send it to us. We would then come to the Appleton Library and check it out. Maybe they'll give it to you for a couple of weeks. You'd be able to take it home just like a regular library book that you check out from our library. Unfortunately, not everything is allowed to be lended like that. It depends on the library that owns it. They are the ones that say yes or no, and how long you can have it for if you can have it. So it's always worth checking. But for example, I got a couple books on the Illinois 47th Regiment that one of my Civil War ancestors served in. Got them sent right to the library for me. Didn't have to go to Illinois, whereas the closest library that had them. I was able to read those books, get what information I needed out of them, and return them right back to the Appleton Library. So very simple. This information is not in your handout on this slide because I just added it this morning. Somebody asked me a question. They said, I'm having a really hard time trying to track my ancestor through a certain regiment because it seems like they're with that regiment for a little bit and then the name changes to something else. And what she meant was there's a certain hierarchy in the Army where a regiment is made out of a certain amount of soldiers, so about 800 soldiers. But then, if they have certain missions or things that they're going to be a part of, they might take 2 to 5 regiments and create what's called a brigade. And that brigade is like 2,600 soldiers. So they might all be fighting together as one unit under one general person who's commanding them. And so then it gets a little confusing, like, okay, are they a part of this regiment or are they part of this brigade or this division? So you kind of need to understand the hierarchy a little bit. And you also, especially for the Civil War, understand what company they served in. Because different companies within a regiment have different assignments. So for example, company A and B in the 47th Illinois might be doing this thing, but company C and D, which your ancestor is a part of, is doing something completely different. So it's really important to know that specific of information so you know what are they doing at a given time if you are that curious of what they're doing. Something I also do is, excuse me, I then make a timeline of my ancestor's service. So for Ira, for example, I write down what date he enlisted and what company, what regiment he enlisted in. I knew that he was injured on a specific date, and I knew he was discharged on a specific date based on the research I've done up until that point. So I start making a little timeline of his service. And then on a separate sheet, I make a timeline of that company and that regiment that he was involved in, this Company G of the Wisconsin 14th. There's a really great resource in Bold 3, which we're going to look at in a few minutes, that kind of gives you the start of a timeline to show you what battles that regiment would have been involved in. So for example, I'd write down on my timesheet or my timeline, they were involved in the Battle of Corinth in October of 1862. Well, if I look, that's when he was injured during that specific battle. And I can see, oh, the next battle that they were in is Holly Springs in December 1862, which is right before he gets discharged in January of 1863. The important part, though, is you also need to go a step further and look at what's called a muster roll, which is kind of like an attendance sheet almost for each person. And it lists that person's specific status. So if you look at the muster rolls for Ira, you can see he's actually in the hospital in December of 1862 because of his injury that he got in October. He's still in the hospital, so he's actually not involved in this Battle of Holly Springs like the rest of his regiment or the rest of his company is. So you kind of need to keep peeling back the layers of the onion as you continue researching to know specifically what your ancestor was doing. And we'll dive a little bit more into muster rolls in just a few minutes. I'll show you an example of what they look like. But again, I would just start creating timelines for that ancestor and for that regiment or that company that they were involved in to know what they were doing. Because you don't want to keep researching the regiment after he was not a part of it anymore. I don't care what they were doing in February of 1863. He's not a part of that regiment anymore. So those battles that they were involved in after he leaves in January of 1863, I know he's not involved in. That makes sense? All right. Something else that's really important to remember as you start going through all these records, you're definitely going to find people that have the exact same name of your ancestor or very close to that same name of your ancestor. So you're going to want to make sure to have a lot of context clues and look at all those context clues to make sure that you're researching the right person. You want to make sure you're researching your ancestor, not an ancestor of somebody else with the same name. So usually I look at their middle name or that middle initial. I look at their residence, where they're living, what state they served from. I look at their occupation, other personal details, like if you know their birth date and their birthplace, or their spouse's name, their kids' names, their parents' names, stuff that's going to differentiate them from somebody with the same name. Those are details you're going to want to know before you start trying to dive into all these military records. So now we're going to talk about a couple specific record types. So of course, before people go into the military, sometimes there's a draft. So your ancestor might have voluntarily enlisted in their service, or depending on the time period, they might have been drafted into service. They didn't have a choice if their number was called. There are existing draft registration records for several of the wars. These include records of those people who didn't end up serving because they were eligible for the draft, but they didn't end up getting called for the draft, for example, or they didn't enact the draft at that time for that war. So just because your ancestor is featured on one of these draft records does not mean that they served, just that they were eligible to serve. So the draft goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War era. During that time, the individual colonies would have the authority to draft men from that colony. In the War of 1812, they had men being conscripted directly into the state militias. There's this law at the time called the Uniform Act of 1792. But by 1845, nearly all the states ended this, which meant, hey, we have a lot of hard time getting men to serve during the Civil War when we're actually at war now and we need people, especially on the Union side. So then the government, of course, said, hey, we're going to pass this Enrollment Act in 1863 to then draft men directly into federal service. So that's why you see this longer draft of all the men during the Civil War. The draft kind of evolves throughout the years with this thing called the Selective Service Act during specific years. And so you can then locate these draft records for the Civil War, World War I, and World War II at this time on several of the genealogy resources. On Ancestry, both the library and the paid edition. On Fold 3, You can get World War I and World War II only. And then Family Search has some World War I and World War II as well. Be aware, World War II drafts, they're scanned in 2 pages. So make sure you get both pages. Whereas World War I, they usually do the 2 pages at one time and it's on one image. So you'll see our example, you'll see kind of 2 separate images when we look at the example that I have. In World War II, there's also 2 separate drafts. So there's a young men's draft and an old men's draft, depending on what their birth date was. And these are separate collections online. So you kind of need to know your ancestor's birth date and what draft they would have appeared in, the old men or the young men. Yes.
Would, like the draft list, would that include people that enlisted?
Would the drafts include people who enlisted?
I mean,
I'm not
they
sure.
probably had to register for the draft, but
I would assume that they would, if they would already, it depends on if they've already volunteered to serve or not.
are these people that have only been drafted, or are they people?
No, these are people who are eligible to be drafted.
Okay, then they should be on.
So they should be on there. Yes.
In Civil War, if someone served in the Confederacy, would they in any way be able to determine whether they had a draft in the?
So as far as I know, the Confederacy did not have a draft. It was only the Union. So if you have a soldier that would have lived in a Confederate state or served with a Confederate army, they would not be in these draft records because these are Union state only.
They would have been in the Union in 1859 before the Civil War, and then if they were.
But when the draft happens, it's 1863. So it's wherever they were in that time. If they were in a Confederate state at that time, they're not eligible or they're not technically required to be drafted at that point because it's not a Union state.
There was a draft in the Confederacy later in the war.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with Confederacy and if they had a draft or not, but possibly.
Just a little, it is a country not that directed to my grandfather. He had substitution in the Confederacy.
Mhm.
You pay someone to serve for you. And I think later in the law changed later in the war, but it was stopped around that to happen. But I've got some court cases where they paid for service.
Mhm.
And then they filed a lawsuit after it was over.
Yeah, so some people, yeah, did pay people to serve in their place if they were kind of their number was called, and yeah, it does happen. So it might happen in your ancestor's case, and you'd need to kind of research the laws and what was going on in that time period. Of course, I mean, we can't get super in depth into all of that because we've got a ton of stuff to cover, but you know, you'd want to research what's going on in that time period of what war they would have served in, what the requirements are, because of course, the requirements for the Civil War draft are going to be different than the requirements for the World War I draft, World War II draft. So things change all the time with the government, of course. So here's an example of a Civil War draft. So you can see it's just basic. This is from Wisconsin. So this is showing my ancestor living in Menasha, their name, what age they are, their color, what their occupation is, their place of birth. There's also a column for former military service and any remarks, but there's none on this page, for example, but perhaps other pages, other people might have information listed there. So you can see just basic information on the Civil War draft. Again, you can only get Civil War draft ones on Ancestry, either the paid edition or the library edition, they have them. And just because they're on here does not mean that they served. I know for sure Jacob Stilp, my 4th great grandfather, my 3rd great grandfather, did not serve. He was just eligible to be called to service if needed.
I just had to look something up.
Sure.
Because all of my ancestors are all Confederates.
Mhm.
And it says the Confederate States of America enacted a military draft or conscription April 1862.
So April 1862, there was a Confederate draft.
Yeah, draft required all healthy white men between the ages of 18 and 35 to serve 3 years in the military.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if those records are online or not, but definitely look at some of the resources we're going to talk about today and see if you're able to find that draft for the Confederate States if you have an ancestor who is living there. Our example up here is the World War I draft. So like I mentioned, this is kind of 2 separate pages, but it's at least on one image. So you can see the front part of the image here and the back part of the image here. I've been told on occasion they are messed up, that sometimes this might not really be your ancestor on the right-hand side. It might be the guy before or the guy after. So double check. Again, you never know. Some people who are scanning it might have scanned it incorrectly, but I know from my other research, this matches with my ancestor. So you can see what kind of information they're asking, their name, their age, their address, date of birth, place of birth, what their occupation is, their father's birthplace, their name of their employer, place of employment, name of their next of kin, and the address of that person. You've got a signature here, which is awesome that you can see your ancestor's signature. Again, these are people who were eligible to be drafted, even if they did serve. So I know for sure John did serve. He still ended up having to file for the draft. So this would have been before he served. So you can see what date they would have registered for the draft at that point. You've got a physical description on the second page of them on the draft. And there's also a spot here if they had any sort of physical defects or things that they would have wanted people to know, like, hey, I've got really bad eyes, or I've got a bum arm or something. They would have written that there so that maybe they wouldn't have gotten drafted because of that reason. Then these are the World War II drafts. So first I'm going to show you the old man's draft. So how you know if it's old man's or young man's is looking at this date up here. So you can see the old men's covers April 28th of 1877 to people born on or before February 16th of 1897. Again, this is just the first page, but you can see similar information to what we see in that World War I draft. Again, you've got the birthday, so he just barely made that old men's draft because he was born in January and not February of 1897. You can see their next of kin, their employer, all that stuff. Again, you get a cool signature of that person. And then you look at that second page, and again, you've got that physical description, any physical characteristics that they would have wanted to list, when that was registered, so you know what date, all that fun stuff. Then you've got the young men's. So these, for some reason, were scanned in color usually, which is kind of also a way to differentiate. But again, up here, the dates are different from that old men's to the young men's. So this is the men who are born on or before that February 17th of 1897, up until December 31st of 1921. So again, they're asking those same types of questions as the old men do. So you're seeing all that same sort of information. It's just that whatever date their birth was if they were old men or young men. And again, 2 pages, so you've got that physical description and physical characteristic stuff as well. Any questions so far? Yeah.
They keep track of the merchant marine people.
For what war?
World War II.
As far as I know, yeah. Yeah, you'd have to look at what records are available. I don't know off the top of my head what records are available because there's so many different collections for all the military records. And we're going to dive into some of those resources in just a minute. So you can see Fold 3, you can see Ancestry, and what records are available. Got any questions for our online folks here? If you need a link to the handouts for the past presentation, send me an email. Someone said find a graves list of family members is often incomplete. Yes, I have a whole a whole presentation all on cemetery research where we're dive more into find a grave, but I just wanted to show you as an example of how you can easily find perhaps some veteran information. Was the muster roll available for every service? Yes, as far as I know. Someone shared a link of the Confederate Conscriptions Act of 1862, so thank you, Christine. Did the Colored Army, US colored troops, have a draft? I believe they were also eligible for the regular draft, but I do not know off the top of my head. Christine did answer yes, they were drafted into the Union Army during Civil War. So she has some information there if you are interested in that. Let's see. Does the special 1890 census for vets list them by the address from which they enlisted? No, it's the address that they would have been in 1890. So if in 1890 they lived in a state that was not alphabetically before Kansas, you're not going to be able to find them in that 1890 census. It's the states alphabetically from Kansas all the way to Wyoming, I think is the last state. So if he was living in Missouri in 1890, you're in luck. Does WorldCat cover books in HathiTrust? It does technically, but it lists it geographically depending on where you are. So HathiTrust headquarters, I want to say, is somewhere in Michigan. So for example, us in Wisconsin, it might not list the Michigan libraries and HathiTrust in there until like the second or third page. So I think it's easier that you just copy that title into that HathiTrust and see if it's there instead of seeing if I can find it in the list. It's, I guess, personal preference on if you want to go through all the list of libraries or not. Were the restrictions on immigrants serving? Depends on the war. So you have to let me know what war you're thinking of. I believe a lot of immigrants served, I know, in the Civil War. And since then, were recent immigrants required to register for the draft? I do not know off the top of my head if they were or not. And it depends on what draft you're asking about, because there were multiple drafts as we just talked about. Civil War restrictions on immigrants. I don't believe there were any restrictions on immigrants in the Civil War because, again, a lot of the Civil War veterans were immigrants. All right, let's see. Would your Nina listing include Southern Winnebago County, Utica Township? I don't know what you mean by my Nina listing. Can you find who has received a Purple Heart? Yes. Christine posted a link. Thank you. There's currently not a way to save the chat, but I can send it out afterwards. All right, let's move on. All right, the next type of record is going to be service records. So if your ancestor did for sure serve in a war or in peacetime, you are able to find records of that service, which is going to give you more details about their service and what they experienced during their service. So you might find records before they served, during their service, and then after their service. Some records might include their enlistment records, what's called a morning report. So these are daily reports given from that specific unit or that regiment that they were involved in that tells you, okay, this is what this guy is doing, or he was transferred here at that time. There's muster rolls, which we talked briefly about a few minutes ago. So again, these kind of record the attendance or the status of what your veteran was doing within that unit or that station that they were serving in. So for example, the Navy did quarterly lists where they were on the vessel or if they were transferred from station to station at that time. You can usually find monthly or bi-monthly muster rolls for the other branches or the other wars. For example, Civil War. Usually when you see a muster roll, it gives like 2 different months at that time. Here are some examples for you. So this one is showing World War II Navy muster. So you can see they've got their name, they've got that service number, which is something I mentioned is super important when you're looking at requesting records or finding other records. It's got a service number for him. So I'm gonna like to write that number down and try to find more records based on that service number. Let's see, it's got his rating in there. It's got his date of enlistment, where he enlisted. And it's talking about he's being transferred for this torpedo squadron at this time. So I can see the date up here. It's September 30th of 1942. So I know he's on this specific ship and being transferred to this other station for additional training. Oh, I did zoom in here, it looks like. So you can see up here what it lists again, and then what he's doing. And it lists specifically, even though this report is at the end of September, it lists that on September 9th, that's when he was transferred to Cape May, New Jersey for Torpedo Squadron 9. So now I know I need to go look at that muster roll in October of 1942 and September of 1942 and see how long he's going to be there, for example. Here's an example of a Civil War muster. So here's Ira. You can see up here too, the different name spellings and variations that you get even on the same individual. So for one card, he's listed as Ira J. Holmes with the E. On the next card, he's listed as Ira J.S. Holmes without an E. So that same person could be spelled multiple different ways and have multiple different iterations of their name with their middle initial, without their middle initial, for example. It's going to list their service, what regiment and unit he was in. So Ira is special in that he served twice with 2 different regiments. So after he was injured and discharged from his first service, he enlisted again in the 3rd Wisconsin Cavalry and served there as an unassigned recruit for a little bit before being assigned with a different company. But you can see right here, September and October of 1864, he's at Fort Zara in Kansas. He's listed as present, and then you can see different notations, like he's got his bounty due for him. You can see right here in November and December, he's still at that same fort. He's listed as present. If he was in the hospital or something, it would list that he was in the hospital or absent for some specific reason, for example.
Story about that. Mine says, my grandfather, absent, escaped guard,
Mm.
and today, of course. And my great-grandfather, my grandfather was born about 9 months ago.
Oh, so he escaped to go make a baby, it sounds like. Yeah. So yeah, you never know what they're going to write on there or what kind of information you can see on these muster rolls. These ones for the Civil War, I did have to get through the National Archives. They're not available online. But this other one that we looked at for the Navy was on Ancestry.com. So again, there's some stuff online, some stuff is not online. So you got to do a little digging online and offline. There's also going to be pension records. So these are a really great record set. The different types and the different eligibility is going to differ depending on the different war, the different laws that are happening. But generally, there's kind of 3 types of pensions. They might have gotten more than one type, depending on their specific nature of their service. So there's one for disabilities, or they call it invalid, meaning that they were disabled in some way due to their service, or unable to work following their service due to something that happened to them in the war. So maybe they got really sick, or they got shot and didn't have complete use of their arm, for example. They would have gotten some money from the government for that if they could prove that that happened in their service and that they had that disability that prevented them from working as a normal person would. They would have had to prove that, of course. There's also a service pension. So this is a pension received specifically for their service. They didn't have to prove anything other than they served. And then there's a widow's or minor's pension. So this is a pension that's received by that widow or the minor children if that person died in service or as a result of their service. So really beginning in the Civil War, you also see sometimes dependent parents or a sibling could also get a pension under that veteran if there was no widow or no children surviving that veteran, and that they proved that they were dependent on that veteran. So if he, for example, had a mom and his dad had died and his mom was dependent on him and then he died, she could then get a pension possibly showing that she needed that support because she didn't have that veteran anymore supporting her, for example. So again, you have to dive deeper into the different type, different eligibility, different laws that are going on to see what your ancestor might have been eligible for. There's sometimes different laws that are passed where you can get an increase in your pension amount depending on what's going on. So For example, I have Ira's pension. You can see multiple different times that there's different laws that are enacted, and then he's requesting an increase in that pension because, you know, he's eligible to try to get that increase in his pension amount based on the law that was given at that time. There are Revolutionary War and War of 1812 pensions as well. Those are mostly online, thankfully, on Fold 3. For the Civil War, unfortunately, only a small percentage of widows' pensions are available on Fold 3. And Confederate pensions as well. There is a small percentage of them. The rest are going to be at the National Archives completely offline. So there's millions and millions and millions of pension files. They're going to take a long time before they're all online, if they ever are online. For those who did have Confederate soldiers in the Civil War, those pensions are not at the National Archives. So if you cannot find them online, you need to check in with that individual state that they would have lived in, not necessarily the state that they served in, but there is some collections on Ancestry. So I would check on Ancestry first to see if you're able to get that pension for that Confederate soldier. Of course, there were different laws for them. They weren't eligible for the traditional pension through the National Archives, of course. So there's a couple different ways where you can get a pension if they're not available online for you. So you can order them to the National Archives. Unfortunately, it's kind of costly and it could be a long wait. So for example, I know the Civil War pensions, they're about $80. That's what it starts at. If that pension file is 100 pages or less, that's what you're paying. If it's a longer pension file, which is awesome for you, it's also more expensive though. So it kind of depends on how big that file is. You could, of course, go to Washington, D.C. and the National Archives for yourself to get those pension files, or you can hire a researcher to go get it for you. So a researcher who might live in that Washington, D.C. area. There's lots of genealogists who do that, who, you know, sometimes they're charged a flat rate or an hourly rate to go get pension files for you. They're usually scan them in Keller and email them to you. And it's pretty quick, a little quicker than ordering through the National Archives. That's how I've gotten my pension files personally. I don't think it's more expensive hiring research. I think it's cheaper because they usually don't charge you that $80, and it depends. The ones that do an hourly rate, of course, if your pension file is only 50 pages, you're saving money by not paying that $80 flat fee because you're paying hourly on how fast they can scan, and usually they can scan pretty fast. Or some that will do the flat rate will do it definitely less than that $80. And I'll show you how to find a professional researcher or somebody who you might want to hire to get these records for you in just a little bit. But first, I wanted to point out the length of the pension files is going to vary. Even if they are denied pensions, because there are people who tried to get pensions and were denied, they still have a file, even though they didn't get a pension. But that length of the file and what's going to be in those files, it's going to be completely different for every person. Don't forget about those collateral lines. So those siblings of our ancestors who might have served, you can get some really awesome family information from these pension files. So I've gotten, you know, like the brother to my third great grandmother who served, I got his pension file, and I've got affidavits from my third great grandmother and my fourth great grandparents in there. So lots of different great things that you can get in there. I've gotten like birth records or marriage records or death records within those pension files as well, or affidavits from the person who married them because there isn't an actual marriage record. So they kind of had to sometimes prove that they were actually married to that veteran if they were a widow, for example, or that veteran was proving who was dependent on him and listing out the children's name and their birth dates, things like that. So you can get lots of great stuff. I've even heard of people getting photos in pension files. I have not been as lucky, but some people have gotten photos of their ancestors in pension files or pages of the family Bible, for example. So there is a link to a YouTube video all about pension records from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War that the Buffalo Library did that I thought was really great. So that will give you a little bit more information on those different records, because of course we can only cover so much about it today, but that's in your handout. So here's an example of just 2 pages from a Revolutionary War pension file. Of course, the pension files are a lot larger than just 2 pages, but you can see Sometimes the handwriting is a little difficult to read. Of course, you can download this page and then zoom in to try to be able to read it, but sometimes it's hard to make out all the different letters and to try to read what it means and all that fun stuff. But this collection's available on Fold 3. We also have it on Heritage Quest as well, which is free through the library. Here's just 2 pages from Ira's pension file that I ordered off through a Red researcher. So again, I've got an affidavit from somebody saying, hey, we were present at the death of this person who is my 4th great grandmother. She died on this date. I was born on this date. My wife was born on this date. There's proof right there. I don't have actual death records or birth records for any of these people. So I'm getting that information directly from the child of this woman who died, who was the widow of this Civil War veteran that they're talking about, for example. You can see you've got signatures of these people on here. Really great information. This is just, again, 1 page out of, possibly 100 pages or 200-page file, depending on how in-depth your ancestor had to prove their service or prove their disability or whatever was going on with them. So how you would request these records is first you would want to see, do they have a pension file? Thankfully, they have the Civil War pension file index online. So you'll find these little cards on Fold 3 where it gives you some information. So you can see right here what regiment and unit he would have served in, and you can see what date he would have filed for an invalid pension, what his application number is, the law it's under, a certificate number. You can see he also served with a different regiment and unit. It's even got his death date and when he died on here. So I would use this information to request, because they're going to want this application number and all this details on here in order to be able to locate those pension files. So this pension index, I believe this is only Union veterans, but there might be a separate Confederate one as well. Because again, the Confederate pensions are through the individual states, not through the federal government. But you could, even if you didn't want to order that pension file, you can still see what unit and regiment they're a part of and use that information to learn more about what that regiment and unit did during a specific time in the Civil War. More records. There's going to be something called bounty land warrant applications. So bounty land is something that soldiers are given. So they're given pieces of land or amount of land as a payment or award for their service. So these were granted from 1788 to 1855. By that time, we had given all the land away. So your ancestor might have gotten land as a result of their service, and you can sometimes find these application files online through the different websites we're going to look at today. There's discharge records. Maybe they were a prisoner of war, and you can find some records on that. There's going to be headstone applications for if they got one of those fancy headstones, talking about their service on there. There's something called the Burrells death file. So Burrells stands for Beneficiary Identification Records Locator Subsystem. Some complicated thing that I don't really understand, but it gives a ton of great information on the various veterans because this is determining if they're eligible for veteran services and all the veteran benefits or not, and so much more. There's lots of other records than what we can cover today, but I'm going to show you a couple examples of some of these things. Sure.
Just an experience that I've had, when you look up the bounty lands that you get for service, make sure that you do a little extra research on it, because a lot of times they have the same names and they were in the same state. And people online have copied the wrong information frequently.
Yeah, bounty land, and just like with other records, like I said, there's going to be the same name. You think your ancestor's name is unique until you start researching records and you see how many Amos Hamiltons there are. So definitely be sure to use some of those context clues no matter what you're researching. So here's an example of a World War I service record that I got from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. So it gives me my ancestor's serial number, which they used during the World War I. I can see a physical description, what rank he was, where he was born, what organization he was a part of, his occupation, marital status, when he enlisted and where, when he was discharged and where, and then some notations about some of his service. And I asked the archivist at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, what do all these random numbers and letters mean? And you kind of need a second degree to try to decipher them all, depending on what war you're looking at, what regiment or unit you're looking at. But usually these are, sometimes they have dates, or like QMC, that's quartermaster corps, or you'll see certain things where you might be able to figure out, but usually these are dates in here and where they're being transferred to, or what specific thing they're being assigned to. So depending on what service you're looking at, you kind of need to just poke around a little bit or ask somebody who knows a little bit more about World War I to try to help you decipher it. I've got another discharge record for him. Again, it's got that Army serial number and has some information about where he was transferred to, where he's born, what his birthday was, all this kind of great stuff. Again, I got through the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. There's also an example of some World War II separation paperwork. So this is called the DD-214. You'll also hear people refer to this. So all veterans who survived World War II would have received this paperwork. So you can see right up here, it's got his serial number. It's got all of his information on where he was living, what unit he was involved in, what he did in the war, when he enlisted, all this great stuff. I got this from the Brown County Veterans Services Office because it hadn't survived and been passed down through my family, and I didn't want to wait for requesting through the National Archives because they, of course, get millions and millions of requests. So I encourage you first to check with a local Veterans Services office where your veteran would have lived. So for example, I knew my great-grandfather lived in Green Bay after the war. So I reached out to the Brown County, Wisconsin Veterans Services Office. All I did was just Google that phrase. So I just Googled Brown County Veterans Services. I see their website right here. I contacted them on a Sunday afternoon. First thing Monday morning, I got a copy of that record in my email. So I can't promise that you're gonna get it that quick, but it's better than waiting months and months and months for the federal government to send it to you if you can hopefully get it locally. So again, you would just Google that county where they would have lived and see if they would have gotten a copy of it, because perhaps your veteran did supply a copy to the county where they lived. If they didn't, I would also check with the State Department of Veterans Affairs. So again, Google search to find that. So you can Google like Montana Department Veterans Affairs. And you can see right here, Montana, they've got a website where they have contact information here, and you can contact them to see. So they've got phone numbers, they've got email addresses. I would reach out and say, hey, I'm looking for the separation paperwork for this person, and any information that you might know about that person that would help you determine if your ancestor was there or not. If you've exhausted that local and that state level, then it's time to reach out to the federal level, the National Archives, or the National Personnel Records Center, depending on what time period you're looking at. Yeah.
Do you need to prove a connection to them? How can you?
I did not. I did not need to prove anything. I offered it. I said, if you need me to prove that I am his great granddaughter, I'm happy to, but he had been long deceased. So it depends. So I think this is past 62 years. Yeah. So he was discharged in 1945. So.
And I'm thinking of the DD.
Yeah. Yeah. These DD-214s, they're, that I would assume that it also goes off that 62-year kind of restriction. So if it's past 62 years, it's open record. I I got this from my family records. Thankfully, my great grandma kept this from my great grandpa. So he was involved in World War II as well. So again, I've got this honorable discharge report. It's got his Army serial number listed right on it, listed where he was discharged, where, when, what his birth date is, all this kind of great information, what he did as a civilian, and then what he did in his military service as well. So again, lots of really great details just off of one form that you might have inherited from, a family member that had it, for example. I've got another one from him, thankfully. Again, we've got an Army serial number. That's what I'm going to use to try to get more information from the federal government when I request information. That serial number is really important to have, or you can search that serial number in some of these genealogy databases as well to see what information you might be able to get. So again, this is one I thankfully inherited from family, and you can see just a little summary of what he did while he was in service and what those dates are. Here's an example of a headstone application. So this obviously would have been filed when they died. So my second great grandfather served in World War I, died quite a while after World War I, but of course, when he died, they wanted to commemorate that service. So veterans were eligible to have this special little plaque on their tombstone. So again, you get the date they enlisted, the date they discharged. You've got a pension or a VA claim number, which you're going to want, again, when you're researching further information on that person to be able to have that number. They've also got that service number up here. So that's stuff that's really helpful that you think, oh, this is just some random headstone thing, but it's going to lead you to further research with those numbers that you've got. Again, you see birth and death dates, what branch of service he had. Even if it's not on the tombstone, you sometimes get a lot more information on these little cards than on the tombstone. So you can see who filed it and a signature from them as well. And these are on Ancestry. That Burls thing that I talked about, there's no actual images of these, but this is available again on Ancestry, but you can see the veteran's name, their birth date, their death date, social security number, what branch they served in, when they enlisted, and when they were discharged. So again, something really simple that will start me on some more research with that information just by searching in Ancestry. So what record sets are going to be available is going to depend on the war that they were involved in, what branch of service they were involved in, and what their specific experience was. So not every veteran is the same, even if they served in the same branch of service or the same war. So for example, those Civil War pensions we talked about, they can be various lengths. You might get one that's 20 pages or you might get one that's 200. It really depends on what is in that file, and not every file has the same stuff. It might include some similar stuff, like you might get some affidavits or some medical reports or some questionnaires in all of them, but no two files are going to be exactly alike, even if they served in the same company with each other. They're going to be different lengths and include different information in them. So now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into where you get these military records. So again, some of them might be online and easily accessible on these main genealogy sites or on the National Archives website. Some records you can order directly from the National Archives, where they have multiple forms depending on what you're looking for, and you would just mail them in and pay for it. Some you have to physically go to the National Archives to research yourself or to hire a researcher. There are going to be two kind of main repositories for these military records related to this service. The first is going to be the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The second is the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. Yes.
Would these, like the National Archives, do they get their information from the record center in St. Louis? You know? I only asked.
They're two
because
separate
my
places.
dad's World War II records were destroyed in St. Louis Center. So might National Archives still have them?
No. So I'm going to dive into that right now. So basically, the difference between the two is the time period. So military stuff generally, but before 1917 is going to be at Washington, D.C. Anything from 1917 on is going to be at St. Louis. I do have a link in your handout where it dives more deeper into specifically what branch or what time periods we're looking for and what they offer at both of those locations. But be aware they do get 1.4 million requests a year. And if you ask for a file, you might not actually get the full file because, of course, they get so many requests. They're trying to just, give you part of a file. And if you want more, you're going to have to go research yourself or hire a researcher. And it'll tell you on their website, this is, a whole detail of what you might expect in what they're going to send you if you request a file and why they only give you these certain documents because of all the amounts of requests that they get, for example. And again, that link's in your handout where you can read all of that. And then this link shows you all the different locations. So if you know, hey, I have a Navy veteran, and I'm going to see, okay, if he was discharged before 1903, it's at Archives 1 in Washington, D.C. If he was discharged between 1903 and 1963, I'm going to go to the National Personnel Records Center. So you can kind of use these tables depending on what branch and what time period to figure out what location has the stuff that I'm looking for. If you can't make it to those locations, consider hiring a researcher or be prepared to spend a bit of money and wait a little bit to hear from the federal government to get those records. Depending on what you order, some things they might be able to fulfill a little bit more quickly. It kind of depends on the amount of requests and the level of detail you're able to provide on your form. Like if you have that service number and you can put it on that form, it's going to let them retrieve that a lot faster than if you don't have that service number, for example. Again, those Civil War pensions, those are like a hot topic that a lot of people request. Those are going to be $80 for the first 100 pages. It might be a few months before you get a response or longer. And again, if it's more than 100 pages, you have to pay more money. Whereas the researchers that you might hire might do an hourly rate or a flat rate, depending on what record type, and usually a quicker turnaround. So you might only have a week or 2 weeks or a month, and you'd get that record depending on, again, on the amount of requests that they get as well. But many scan them in color, which is really great, whereas the copies you get from the federal government are all just black and white usually. But the researchers, like my researcher that I've worked with, she scans it in color, she puts it on Dropbox, I just download it, and then I have all the images that I, in that pension file, and then I can print them if I want to print them or save them somewhere else outside of Dropbox, of course. Then I'm not, waiting on her to print them or having her have to pay to, mail me 150 pages, which is not cheap through the post office, for example. So if you're looking at hiring a researcher, what I always recommend is you always get a professional genealogist. Thankfully, some of the repositories, especially the National Archives, have a list of recommended researchers that they recommend, that they have worked with, that they know they're great researchers and they would trust to get these records for you. They have those listed on their website. So if you go to the National Archives website, you can see independent researchers for hire, and you can see there's different research topic specialties that you might want to look into or different locations that you might be looking into. So military records, for example, you could click on, and then it's going to give you a listing of some of these people, and it might say what their specialty is or where they're located. Like, if you're wanting to hire someone to research at Washington, D.C., you're not going to want to hire this guy in Missouri because he's going to research at that National Personnel Records Center and not at Archives 1 in Washington, D.C., for example. So you could look at these, you could send them an email or give them a call. Some of them have links to their website where you can learn a little bit more, do your little bit of research on, making sure that they have good testimonials from past clients, things like that. There's also something called the Association of Professional Genealogists. So they've got a directory where you can go to their website and you can search on here, right here where you go to their website, it says find a genealogist. And this even works for stuff outside of military records. If you're looking for a researcher in Germany, for example. So you can kind of select what you're looking for. If you're looking for somebody to do family history research or DNA, you can put in any sort of keywords. So I can put in like military, for example, or if I want someone based in a specific area, I could do that as well. And then you can see again all the different results, and then you'd be able to click on the different pages to learn a little bit more about them, see what kind of degrees they might have or testimonials they might have, see their website, and kind of do your little bit of research and contact them if you'd like. So unfortunately though, with military records, there was a fire in 1973 that occurred at that military personnel records center in St. Louis. So this is where a lot of those after 1917 records exist. So this fire destroyed or damaged an estimated 16 to 18 million records, which is a lot. So about 80% of Army files from people who were discharged between 1912 and 1960 were a part of what was affected mostly. We've also got approximately 75% of Air Force files but for those people who were discharged between 1947 and 1964, specifically with those alphabetically from James E. Hubbard to the end of the alphabet. So those might be included in, your ancestor might be included in that amount of stuff that was damaged, unfortunately. If you've got an ancestor who served in the Navy, the Marines, or the Coast Guard, thankfully those records were not affected. So my great grandpa who served in the Navy in World War II, thankfully his is not part of the stuff that was burned. There have been some efforts to try to reconstruct the stuff that was burned or destroyed or damaged beyond repair, or I've seen a lot of people posting stuff that they've gotten from the National Archives that you can see it's like burned half of the record, but you can still make out some stuff. They're still, of course, ongoing trying to restore this stuff, even though it happened back in 1973, because again, 16 to 18 million records were destroyed in this fire. It's not just something that they can quickly reconstruct all these files and have them all available. There is a link in your handout where you can learn a little bit more about the fire and their reconstruction efforts. They do still have records that are available that weren't affected by the fire, or there kind of are some workarounds that you'd want to work with somebody who's very familiar in kind of reconstructing these files if your ancestor's file has not been reconstructed yet. Yes, this is the part of the National Archives in St. Louis. We're also going to have a presentation in October by Tina Beard. So she is talking all about the different military and civilian records that are available at this National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. So we're going to do this in October. This is part of our regular Find Your Ancestors program that we do through the library. So you want to mark your calendar for Saturday, October 12th. We're going to have it online on Zoom. If you can't make it, we are going to record it and put it online. But she's going to discuss all the different records that you can get at this center, how to access them. So in addition to those military records, they also have civilian and government employee records. So if your ancestor was a postmaster, for example, you might be able to get records through St. Louis on their employment through the federal government. I've got a registration link in your handout if you'd like to register for that. And again, we are going to post it on our YouTube channel if you're not able to make it, but sure go through a lot more in depth on what you can expect to find at that research facility. Questions so far? I know we're getting close to time and we're still not through. Still got lots of really great demonstrations to show you guys. Christine recommended Brian Reinhardt. He has civilwarrecords.com. He's really great, quick researcher. Someone asked, if my relative was killed in action, where do I go for records? It depends on what war. I'm going to show you a few resources in just a second. Someone said, after 3 attempts to get my father's Army service record, I finally received a reply that his record was part of the fire. all that they could supply was a very poor quality of his final pay voucher. I know he was both the European and Pacific theaters, and I was hoping to get more details. Is there other avenue for me to pursue? I'm not familiar with researching those reconstructed records. I would reach out to a researcher who is familiar with that. Yes, if you walked away, you can watch the recording on what I talked about the St. Louis fire. So there was a fire in 1973 that destroyed lots of records that perhaps might have affected your ancestors' records. Again, there's also information in your handout about that fire if you want to learn more. So World War I or World War II killed in action, there are some resources on Fold 3 and on Ancestry as well. So again, we're going to go through that in just a second. Is there a source specifically for Native veterans? Fold 3 has a whole section on Native American military records as well. We're going to Fold 3 in just a minute. All right, so now we're going to dive through some of these online resources, and I'm going to show you a couple things. Many of these have rosters and other specific war collections through these sites. We can't really dive super in depth into all of them because there's just so much records that they have online, but we are going to go through a couple. So Ancestry has a paid version where you can have a subscription, or we've also got the free library edition where you can access in the library if you just come to the Appleton Library. We've also got Fold 3 Library Edition. That's kind of our military records database. You can access that free from home if you have an Appleton Library card, or check your local library if you don't have an Appleton Library card with us. Family Search, completely free. You do want a free account and be signed into your free account to view those records. There might be some restricted records that you come across. If you see restricted records and it says that you can access that at an affiliate library, we are an affiliate library and you can come view that at Appleton. We've also got Heritage Quest, which you can use from home for free if you live in Wisconsin, or check with your local library if you don't. And then the National Archives catalog, available from home for free for all of you. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration using the paid edition of Ancestry because I can't show you the library edition. But a lot of these collections are also available in the library edition if you don't have a paid subscription. You would just have to come to the library to access them. So there's kind of several different ways to search for specific military records in here. So one of the ways is just going up to the search area, and you can see there's a whole spot that says military. So that would be a really great starting point if you're looking for military records. I could search my ancestor's name right here, or I could look at the different categories if I know I'm looking for draft stuff, or I'm looking for casualties or pension records. You can narrow it down by that. Or if you can see some of these collections over here, like, hey, I want to look in the World War I draft stuff, I can click on that collection and dive in there. There's also, if you click on search and go to all collections instead of narrowing down to military, there's another way. Over here on the right-hand side, you see they've kind of got these different category headings, and there's one for military right here. So again, you could click in that way and be brought back to that same page. But I feel like you should just go to search in military and dive in that way instead. And then the other main way to do that, again, under the search part, is going to the card catalog. So this is kind of like a library card catalog almost, where it's going to give you a listing of all the different resources they've got in this website. So right away, you see there's over 33,000 different collections, which is a lot, but that's not just military stuff. To just get the military stuff, they have these filters on the left-hand side. So you can see down here, there's a whole thing that says military. So I could click on that, and then I see, oh, there's about 1,400 military-related collections. But thankfully, they've got it further narrowed down. So if I'm looking for draft stuff, for example, I can click on the one that says draft, enlistment, and service. And now I can see there's just 300 collections. I can narrow it further by location, by time period as well. I could even also search different keywords in here. So say I'm just looking for the draft stuff for World War I or World War II, for example, I would put either in the title or in the keyword, I would put draft. And now I can see, okay, these are ones that specifically have draft in the title. So now I'm only looking at 8 collections instead of the hundreds or thousands. So now I can look and see, oh, I'm looking for this World War I draft collection. I want to search and see if I can find my ancestor. I can go ahead and click on there. If you scroll down first, it's going to give you a little bit of information and talk to you a little bit about this record type, where you can learn a little bit more about that. Because of course, there's only so much I could talk about it with you for a few minutes. But if you're just looking at searching right away, you can just put in your ancestor's name. Oops, if I type it all the way. You might want to put in their birth year, for example, maybe a birth location if you know it. And then click search when you're ready. Now right here, thankfully, he is the only John Kebschel born in that year in that place. So I can see his record right over here if I click on view image. And then this is, again, that example I showed you earlier where you can see his draft registration card. So there's lots and lots of other things other than draft records. There might be other specific military stuff, like I had some muster rolls and things before. So I always go to like this card catalog. You can type in muster, for example. And then you can see, oh, here are Navy muster rolls, or here's some German stuff, or Royal Air Force stuff. So you can look at all of these things. All you have to do is just click on it, and then you can learn more and see what this record thing might be, and then search your ancestor's name in it and be able to look at that information.
Local counties, a little bit different
I'm not sure if they sell their data to Ancestry. They do have agreements. So just like any of the other genealogy websites, they would have an agreement with the people who own that record, whether it's county or the state or the federal government, saying you guys can have access to this stuff and if there's any restrictions and stuff.
Some states you put in the state, but you only get maybe 3 counties.
Yeah, some stuff it might be federal collections, it might be state collections, it might be county collections. So search all kinds of different ways, depending on what you're looking for. Not everything's online, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah,
Is it all printable from the library?
absolutely. You can, if you come use the library edition, you can either save it to like a USB drive if you bring a USB drive, or you can print it right there. Of course, if you do print it at the library, it is 15 cents a page for black and white, but a lot of people, bring their USB drive and save all the stuff that they want to, and then you can bring it home and print it if you want to, if you've got a printer at home, or yeah. As soon as you find that, record or whatever that you're looking for, there's a spot in here to just, save it. So up here, you'd click save and save to your computer, and that's what you would do. Or you could even print it from here. If you click on this little wrench icon, there's a print button right there or a download button right there. And it looks pretty much the same in the library edition. The library edition also does give you some international records. So if you don't have the world subscription to Ancestry and you have an ancestor who would have fought or served in an international thing, or you're looking at international records, come use the library edition before you sign up for the world edition. There's also potentially hints on your Ancestry tree if you do have that paid version of Ancestry. That might be for military records, so usually you see those draft registrations and things like that. Hints, unfortunately, only cover a small portion of the collection that's on Ancestry, and you only get a few hints at a time because, of course, they want to keep giving you the breadcrumbs to keep you subscribing. So if you're only looking at those hints on your family tree, you're missing out on a lot. That's why I always recommend using that card catalog. And then you can see what collections are there, depending on what you're researching, and making sure that you're finding all of the things in Ancestry instead of just relying on the hints to come and waiting for the hints to come. Because it might be a while before you get hints on a certain person. So this is just a screenshot of what the library edition looks like. There is a little bit of overlap with Fold 3 as well, which we'll look at Fold 3 in just a minute because Ancestry owns Fold 3 at this point. But just like we did with the paid edition, there's that search bar. You can go to all collections, you can go to military, you can go to card catalog. There's also If you scroll further down on the library edition page, there's a whole spot that has military right here where you can just dive into those military records, or they've got quick links down here where you can also click on military to start going into those military specific records in the library edition. So that's the only big difference is they've just got a couple easier ways in the library edition to get to those military records. The library edition has 771 collections in the military category. Most of them are going to be US and European collections. They do have a couple other countries or continents. Compared to the paid edition, we've got about 1,400 collections. So a lot more in the paid edition, but you know, for some people, the paid edition is just not an option. Definitely come utilize our free library edition. There's lots of different subcategories of the different military record types that you can find. You know, prisoner rolls, draft stuff, casualties, awards, all that kind of stuff. Like somebody was asking about, you know, Purple Hearts and stuff. That's going to be, you know, possibly in here as well. I've got a couple listings of some of the different collections you can find, like those drafts, those muster rolls, that Burl's death file, a veteran's grave site. We've got Army enlistment stuff from World War II. We've got really great Civil War stuff on different soldiers. Like they've each kind of have these little record profile things on a lot of the Civil War soldiers. So you can get some of their basic, like when they enlisted and what unit they served with. We've got those headstone applications that we looked at earlier, an example, Revolutionary War rolls, Army register stuff, War of 1812. We've got the Sons of American Revolution membership applications. So if you have descendants who they come from somebody who served in the Revolutionary War, they would have possibly applied to be a part of this Sons of American Revolution or Daughters of American Revolution. They would have had to prove that lineage of that person that they descend from. And they have the membership applications for the Sons of American Revolution on Ancestry. So here's just a quick example. So you can see kind of they lay out their information on where they were born, who they were born from, their birth and death stuff, their marriage stuff. And you can see information on the veteran that they are claiming service from, what service they had, lots and lots of stuff. It just shows the lineage and the information like the dates and stuff, but it doesn't show actual proof. They might list sources where they have, so down here you can see some of the sources that they used and where they got some of the information from, but it's not going to give you actual copies of that proof. You need to track that down yourself or order it. I know you can order it through the Daughters of American Revolution in some cases. I've got a whole huge video on using Ancestry and Ancestry Library Edition. Give you lots of tips and tricks. It's not like a tutorial on how to use the site, but just how to use it more effectively. So if you are kind of already familiar with Ancestry and you want to learn a little bit more about how to use it, definitely check out this video that I did a couple years ago. If you want a more in-depth, like how do I use the site? How do I build a family tree? How do I search different collections? Let me know and I can create a nice little longer video tutorial for you guys, or we can do a presentation like this all on Ancestry. I've also created a user guide. If you're really not familiar with using that library edition specifically, I've got a whole user guide. I thought I linked it here, but I guess not. It's available on our website where it just basically walks you through how to use Ancestry Library Edition. So you could also find it here in our e-library listings. If you click on more details, it's going to give you that user guide right here as well. So this kind of walks you through with some screenshots and some instructions on how to start beginning your search, different ways you can search, using that search box, things like that. So if you're really not familiar with using Ancestry or Ancestry Library Edition, I've got 14 pages of information. Like you had asked about printing or saving stuff, it's going to walk you through how to do that down here. So with some screenshots for you. Now we can dive into Fold 3. So Fold 3, again, this is, you have to have an Appleton Library card if you are an InfoSoup library card holder and you have a library like Little Chute or Kaukauna as your library, it's not going to work. You're going to have Appleton listed as your library. If you don't, then you can come into the Appleton library and get it changed so that you can use this for free from home. Because we at Appleton specifically pay for it, it's not something that the whole library system pays for. That's why you specifically have to have an Appleton library card. But what you would do is you would come into the library's website, go to eLibrary. We've got a whole A to Z listing of all of our databases, or you can click on this link where it says genealogy to just narrow it down to the genealogy ones. And then you can see Fold 3 Library Edition is one of the options. And now this is where it's going to ask for your library card number. So you're going to need to put your library card number in here. So all right, so once you put your library card number, you are logged in. And now you can start searching in this site. So just like the other sites, there's lots of different ways that you can search. So one of the things you can do is you can search by the name of your ancestor, by their service number, what regiment they served in, a specific place or specific date. So for example, if I want to search my ancestor, John Kebschel, usually if I'm searching a name, I'm going to put it in quotation marks so it knows to search that specific name. And I can see some results here. So you can see here's that World War I draft card. Here's a census record. Here's a World War II draft card that we looked at before. And then you can see other things. So you can see kind of over here, they've got little highlights on maybe if he's featured in here or not. And it kind of gives you like a little preview over here on the right, but then you just click on the image to be brought into the image. So here's an example of one of those morning reports. These are something that every morning, this different regiment or unit would have filled this out. And it just lists here like what's going on. So it says these men were transferred to this here and assigned duty in the laundry section of this camp. So now I know my ancestor was doing laundry for the soldiers. So it's got his name listed here as well as his service number. So that's why it's also cool to search by their service number and possibly find them that way, especially if their name was maybe a little misspelled or maybe a more common name. You would want to definitely search by that service number. But just like the other sites, I can go ahead and save this or print it. If I go under actions right here, it allows me to download it or print it. I can also save it to my ancestry tree. If you've logged into your ancestry tree, that way you can also save it as well. Another thing you can do is, I want to show you just the various ways. So I can search by another ancestor's name and you can see, oh, there's 526 results because he's got a little bit more of a common name than John Kebschel. Well, I don't want to go through 500 some results. So if you look over here on the left-hand side, I can narrow stuff down. So I know he served in the United States. I know he served in the Civil War. So I can start narrowing stuff down by clicking these little boxes. And then I can really get some information narrowed down. Now I've only got 20 results instead of 520 results to go through. You also want to definitely search multiple different ways. So this is just his first name and last name. I might also, if I go through these results and find everything, I might also just put in his middle initial and see what results I get. I might put in his full middle name in here and see what results I get. Well, there's no results for that one. So kind of try to experiment with your search a little bit to see what additional resources you might get. Like we looked at earlier, we had IRA. Sometimes it was IRA J Homes, sometimes it was IRA JS Homes, sometimes it was just IRA Homes, sometimes it was with an E, without an E. So search multiple different ways because they might be spelled multiple different ways. Again, you can also search by their service number. So I've got my great-grandpa's service number. And I can see, look at, here he is right here in this World War II muster roll. And so again, it's got him right here, where he enlisted, what date he enlisted, what his rating is, all that kind of fun stuff. And then I see he's on line 7. So I come down here to see where he's going or what he's doing and learn a little bit more about his service and where he is at a given time. Another thing I like to do is I like to search by their specific regiment or unit number. So I could search this Illinois 47th Infantry that I know my ancestor served in. And I can see, oh, look at, there's all these different companies. Well, I know he served in Company D, so I'm going to look for Company D. And I can click on it. And now this is really great about the Civil War units. They have lots of great information specifically on the Civil War units, where you can see how many soldiers were there, most common residents, how many died or were wounded, kinds of information in here, maybe what battles they were involved in. They've also got a timeline in here. So earlier when I had mentioned doing a timeline for your ancestor and then a timeline of what their regiment or unit was doing, this is kind of what I start with right here. You might see that this company was organized a certain date. They were involved in this certain battle. This is just specifically the company, but they also have the whole unit as well. So if I go back or I go just to the Illinois 47th, it's going to give me a longer timeline. So they have it broken down by the whole unit or by individual companies. So you can see the timeline for the whole company is a lot more detailed, or the whole regiment is a lot more detailed than just one of the companies. So you can see the company that my ancestor was involved in was only involved in one battle, whereas all the rest of the guys were involved in all of this stuff. So this is kind of what I would do when I would start making out a timeline for a different regiment that my ancestor was involved in. And you can see the different battles, you can see different images that they might have been involved in, the different companies are in here, all the soldiers are listed in here, you can click on their names and learn more. They've also got where you can narrow down their name right here, so I can type in my ancestor's name. And I can see, oh, he's got a page here. So these are all memorial pages that have been created in Fold 3, where some people have saved information, like records that they found on this person or their relatives. So now I can see all these different records that somebody has attached, and I can click on it and view it. Sometimes it's linking you to Ancestry. So like this one says view on Ancestry. So I've got to go out of Fold 3 to view this. So you'd have to have a subscription or be in the library and use the library edition for that to work. But you can see all the different things that people have put on there. Some people have put photos of their ancestor in here or other different details in there that you can also use to further your research. Another spot to, or another way to get to these kind of memorial pages is going to this honor wall under featured. So you can search by your specific ancestor's name right there. So I could just search for him right here as well. So they're trying to get all the veterans to have one of these. Not all of them do at this point. It's going to be slow now. Come on. All right, there we go. So you can see, I can then click on him here and be brought into that same page. Another way to search in Fold 3, if you are having difficulty finding people by name or by the service number, all that other stuff that I just showed you, if you scroll down here, we've got a couple international collections. If you have an ancestor who served in a different Australia, Canada, New Zealand, or United Kingdom. Somebody also asked earlier about Native American, or someone asked about the colored troops. So we've got specific areas for those collections. We've also got some non-military stuff in here. So they've got some census records, they've got city directories in here, newspapers, they've even got a couple birth records and things in here. So they've got some non-military stuff in here. But you can also click in the different wars, of course, that your ancestors would have been involved in. So for example, maybe I just want to click in World War II. And I can learn a little bit more about World War II right here if I need a little history refresher. But what I usually do is I click on publications, and then I can see these are all the different collections underneath World War II that I can then search in. So if I want to search for the draft stuff, I can just type in here draft, and now I can see, oh, there's the old men's draft, the young men's draft, and then I can search within here. So now I can go to browse, or I can type in my ancestor's name in here. and then get them. So now I can see all these collections, or all these people just within that one collection and be brought into there, instead of trying to search by all the different name spellings of their name, for example.
Do these databases also include some of the lesser services like Coast Guard and Merchant Marine?
Yeah. There's also a spot under here if you click on browse instead of if you don't want to search by name. Sometimes they list them broken out by state, or by different alphabetical listings. It depends on each of the collections and how the collections are organized. But for example, I could start typing in Wisconsin and then just do that. And then you can see it's broken down by surname. So I can start typing in the surname and I can see, oh, there's 8 results. And then I can click in to see, oh, this is the guy I'm looking for, and then be brought into his record that way. Another great thing to note on here is the completeness. So you can see this one says 99% complete. Well, if I go back out here and I look at some of the other stuff, you know, that one's 100% complete. If I look at, you know, maybe Civil War stuff, like I mentioned earlier, the pension files. Well, if I look at pension, I can see the Civil War widows pensions, it's only 22% complete. You can see that right here, or if I click on the title, I can see it right up here where it says how complete the file is. So if I search for my ancestor and I don't find them there, well, I know it's not 100% complete. So maybe in 6 months, and when it's 50% complete, maybe I'll try searching again to see if they've been added at that point. But of course, if it's only 22% complete, that's not, you know, showing everything that they have on this collection. I've got a couple collections on here that are, or like numbers of how many collections they have. You can see they've got a really great Civil War, World War I, World War II stuff. They've got those war memorials and the honor balls. So they've got some specific war memorials on there as well. They've got pages for a lot of veterans, or you can create one if your ancestor doesn't have one. They've got some international collections, non-military collections. They've got some free collections, even if you don't have access to the library edition or a subscription. You can get access to some of the free stuff as well. Here's a couple of the highlights of the collections. They've got various service records from the different wars, pension records, like I mentioned, for Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Marine Corps muster rolls, the Bounty Land warrants, some Civil War, really great stories and unit histories, some photos, some morning reports, some panoramic photos, lots of great stuff. Photos, scrapbooks, yearbooks, Medal of Honor recipients, all kinds of great stuff. They will have more records coming soon. So earlier this year, they announced the National Archives plans to digitize an additional 500 million records by September of 2026, thanks to this new digitization center that they created out east. And they also expanded their affiliation between the National Archives and Ancestry, which is going to add more stuff to Ancestry and to Fold3, which is also owned by Ancestry. So some things that they said, we're going to focus on this is the World War II morning reports, the post-World War II draft registrations, and some naturalization and immigration stuff from the National Archives in San Francisco. So if you had ancestors who came through Angel Island, for example, you might find some records on them coming soon. So we don't know exactly when all this stuff is going to come, but obviously in the next few years, they're hoping to digitize a lot more and get that on Fold3 and Ancestry. So look for more coming soon. We got some questions before we move on to our next set of stuff. Please do a presentation on how to use Ancestry in Fold3. I will try. Is there anything online for Korean War? There is quite a bit on Korean War on Fold3. Not as complete on specific veterans because of course the 62-year kind of privacy restriction, you're not going to get a ton of stuff on the more recent stuff. Those are going to be more offline, but you can at least start your search online and see what you're able to find. Any questions by our in-person people? Yes.
Did you see that? I can get it on my Keep it at home.
You can access it from home as long as your library card is for Appleton. So if it doesn't say Appleton, if you're like Little Chute or Kaukauna or one of the other branches, you'd have to have it say Appleton in order for you to be able to put in your library card number and get it to work from home.
Can you hold it, like, say, a Kimberly library card and an Appleton card?
Nope. So basically it's just switching a little thing within the back end. And what it does for you is it means like if you're putting stuff on hold, it's going to default to Appleton. If you would rather pick it up at Kimberly, you just have to select the drop down and select Kimberly instead when you're putting stuff on hold.
There's some things that, like the Kimberly library I can get
Yeah.
that I can't get with
Mhm.
another library.
Yep. So just like Appleton, we do that too as well. There's stuff that, you know, the specific libraries pay for, so then we don't want the greater system to have access to it unless you're specifically our patron. So it all boils down to money all the time.
Yep.
All right, so the next resource we're going to go through quick is Family Search. So again, this one's completely free. I do recommend having a free account because a lot of stuff when you're trying to search, it will, you know, prompt you to log in. So you might as well create a free account and be signed in. So I already signed in earlier when we pulled up one of the examples. But once you get into Fold 3 Family Search and sign in, if you go under Search, there's going to be a couple different ways, again, that you can search in here. But one of the ways is going to be under Records. So there's kind of 3 different ways right on this page. You can either start typing in your ancestors' information over here. You can find a collection and do it by collection title, or you can search by a specific place over here. So I might start typing in Civil War over here. And now I can see all these different things like, oh, some Alabama service records for Confederate soldiers, or Arkansas, or Arizona, or Delaware, all these different places. I can start typing in different keywords that I would want to search in, or I can start typing in Wisconsin, for example, and see all the Wisconsin stuff in here, for example. So you could do that. I could start typing in draft and see all the different things. So just like all the different other record collections on all the other sites, some of them are a national level where it's all United States. Some of them break it down by state. Some of it's even broken down by county. So try all multiple different ways. Search by the name of the war or the record type that you're looking for to see kind of what's accessible. The other thing you could do instead of start typing stuff is you can click on this Browse All Collections. And it's going to give you this whole listing of all the different records that they have in here. And you can start typing that collection name over here, or you can use these little filters on the right-hand side. So you can see there's one specifically for military, and now I can see there's about 300 results just for military specific records. And then I can even search within here. I can narrow it down to Wisconsin. Well, there's no Wisconsin specific military ones. There's going to be maybe some United States specific ones. So I could type in United States and see, oh, here's some prisoner of war during the Korean War. Here's some casualties of the Vietnam War, or all these kinds of different records that they have. And once I find something that I'm interested in looking at, I would just click on it and start researching. So for example, I could type in a draft record, and then I can type in that ancestor's name over here. And then I can see all the various results. As long as it's got a little camera icon, that means there's an actual image for it. So I would click on that image and be brought into that actual image. So thankfully on Family Search, sometimes they will scan it. So remember the World War II ones are 2 separate pages. Sometimes they're scan it that it's all in one image. So you can see the front and the back here, and then I would just be able to save it right here with this little arrow. Another spot to find different collections is going to be here under Search, and click on Images instead of Records. So under the Images tab, this is all the stuff that's not indexed yet. So it means I can't just type in my ancestor's name and get the records. These are all things that have to be indexed yet. So I can still browse these images and see if I can find some good stuff. But instead of searching by your person's name, you want to search by a place here first. So what I could do is I could even just type in United States and click search. You can see there's over 2 million results. That's a lot. I'm not going through all 2 million. But thankfully over here on the right-hand side, you can narrow down by a specific state, or under life event, you can narrow down to just the military stuff. So there's military service, or you can narrow down by whatever you're looking for. And then you can see there's all these different things. Like if I'm just looking for draft stuff, or I'm just looking for death records or casualty reports or whatever I'm looking for, I can do that. And then I need to click the update button. Once I do that, all those 2 million things get narrowed down to just 163,000. So again, you want to kind of play with the different filtering stuff. You know, maybe I'm looking for somebody in California, so I'd click on California and I would update it. You can see then it narrows down. You can also narrow it down further by a specific county, or even sometimes a specific city within that county. And then you can see, oh, what the description is. Sometimes you might want to scroll a little to the side and see if there's anything special written here. But then you just click on it and then be brought into it. And then you can browse page by page if it's something that seems interesting that might feature your ancestor. And you can click on it and go page to page and see if you're able to find your ancestor. Sometimes it's really tedious that way, but unfortunately they don't have these indexed yet, so you're not able to search them at this point. Then one other place I want to show you is the catalog. So just like Ancestry, they also have a catalog here. So if you click on search and go to catalog, I can also search here. I can search by place, or I can search by a specific keyword. So I could just type in Wisconsin, for example. And I can click on search. And then you can see they break it down by various categories here. So I can see biographies and Bible records and census records. Well, if I keep scrolling down, there's military things. So you can see Civil War, you can see Spanish-American War, World War I, et cetera, et cetera. So I can click on all of these little things to kind of create a drop down and see what these all are. And then once I find something that I'm like, huh, this sounds really interesting, let me see more about it, I would just click on the title. And then I can read a little bit more about what this is and see, oh, this one's only a book and I have to go to the Family Search Library to get it, unfortunately. But sometimes if there's a digital copy, it'll list digital copy in red, and then it'll give you a link to click on it. But I could also take this title into WorldCat and see if I can find a copy of this closer than Salt Lake City in Utah. Some of these collections are going to be available online. Some of them are not online. So you just kind of have to play around with what you're looking at and keep on clicking and seeing what you're able to find. This one, for example, it looks like it's just on microfilm. So sometimes you get stuff that's online, sometimes you get stuff that's offline. If you just want to look at what's online, there is a little button over here that you can click online, and it will just show you the things that are available online. So if you don't want to get frustrated by finding stuff and then finding out you have to go get it somewhere else, this is where you can quickly narrow it down and see this stuff's available online. So see, this is what I meant when I said sometimes it said there's a digital image. Now I can click on it and get it here, and then be brought into the digital library where I could then read this book or look in the pages and see if I can search my ancestor's name. So I can click on it. There's a little search button up here where I can type in a specific name. And then it's going to give me results on those different pages. I can click on that and be brought to that specific page where that specific name is. For example, I could download it right here. So they've got lots of digitized books in here as well. If you don't want to go through the catalog to find all those digital books, there's also, if you go under search and go to books, this will bring you right into that digital library where you can search a specific phrase or keyword or a specific title of something. So I could type in like Wisconsin Civil War. And see what books are available in their digital library that I can then look at. So you can see sometimes they might have a restricted access or sometimes it's public access. If it says public access, I can click on this and I can read it to my heart's content, or I can again click the little search button and then search a specific unit or a specific name in here and then find it on those pages. They've got millions and millions and millions of books on here, so you are sure to find something. If you come across this fun little icon at any time when you're searching, that means that this collection is locked for access. If you click on this little icon, it will tell you, hey, I can access this in an affiliate library, or I can access it at the Family Search Library or a Family Search Center. If it says you can access it in an affiliate library, you would want to come to Appleton Public Library and look up that same collection and then be able to view the actual images. Unfortunately, just because there's certain restrictions, they can't give access to everybody. It might have restricted access where you'd have to come into the library to view it. If you don't live in the Appleton area, or you want to look at where the nearest Family Search Center is, there's this cool little button up at the top of the right-hand top of the screen that's got like a little pin. There you can search for your closest affiliate library or your closest Family Search Center. And then you can figure out when they're open and all that fun stuff. On Family Search, they've got over 300 military collections, including some international collections. Again, some of them are broken down at the state level, but there's also countrywide collections, lots of digitized books and unindexed records like I just showed you, so don't skip those. I've got a really, really long overview of how to use this site. If you're not very familiar with using Family Search, maybe have a snack and watch this whole video. It's almost 3 hours of me talking just about Family Search and showing you all the different things on Family Search. So really in-depth how to use it. I've also got a user guide that I created that looks very similar. If you don't want to watch me talk for 3 hours, you want to see the screenshots and read some information instead, I've got a user guide instead. Now we're going to dive into Heritage Quest quick. So again, this one's free from home if you live in Wisconsin. So you just go into the APL site, just like we did with Fold 3. And then you'd be able to click into Heritage Quest. It looks very similar to Ancestry Library Edition and Ancestry Paid Edition, but it's just a little bit more difficult to use. You kind of need to know what collections you're looking at instead of this big site-wide search, unfortunately. So there's a couple different ways to search in here. There's a big search button up here or a search button up here. Both of them will get you to the same spot, and I'll show you in just a second. Or you can scroll down here. They've got a whole Revolutionary War section. If you know you want to search specifically in the Revolutionary War, I would click on that. And then I put in the information in order to search just within this collection. So I want to search for this specific person. Maybe I put in where they lived, for example. And then click search. And then you can see all the different results. As long as you see this little image icon, that means there's an actual image. And then I can click in. And then this is the whole pension file or bounty land warrant application file for this person. And I can go page to page and start downloading and saving all the records here. So if you click this save to this computer, you can save it to your computer and then be able to print it, or use this little icon just like on Ancestry and be able to print or download. They have a little bit more than just this Revolutionary War pension stuff on here. So like I said before, there's a little search box here or a little search box here. If you click on that, it'll bring you to the various little kind of collections that they've got. So you see census records, books, wills and probates. They've got a whole section on military records. So I can click and search now, and then I would see the specific military records they have. So they've got some Columbia stuff, they've got some Germany stuff, they've got that Revolutionary War thing that we just searched. They've got a couple other Confederate things or other various records. It's kind of like a mixture of just various things. So not as complete as some of the other sites I just showed you, but this could perhaps help you depending on what you're looking for. Next, I'm going to show you the National Archives. So the National Archives does have its own site and its own catalog where they've got some great stuff in here. I must have forgotten to put my little link in here, I guess. So it's just catalog.archives.gov. And what you would do is you would just search that person's name that you're looking for. All right, catalog.archives.gov. It's in your handout as well. Page 9 of your handout. So I'm searching for this specific guy, and I want to search maybe and see if they have his pension record on here. I'm gonna click that. Wouldn't you know, look at that. This Revolutionary War pension file is on here for this person. So you can kind of see like a little preview of it to make sure, oh, I'm looking at the right person. Yep, Betsy Carr, I know that's his wife. So you can click into it and then be brought into that record. So you can see all the various images are right here. So there you go. You can see all of his stuff in here as well. So if you want to download it, there's a download button to download all the pages of this file. They've got lots of other things in here. So again, just kind of search different keywords or whatever you're looking for. They've got tons and tons of stuff on here. Now it's going to be super slow because I put in a really general term, but you can see lots of different records that have been digitized and put online through the National Archives. They've also got this other archival databases section of the National Archives website. So this is different than the one I just showed you, but they do have some great military collections in here. So you can see right here, they've got a war section, they've got a genealogy section, they've got place sections, they've got time sections. So you can just start searching right away. Like I can just put in my last name and see what pops up. And you can see, oh, that name was found in this numerical identification files, or this records on tradings and securities, or the World War II enlistment records. So you can click on this view records and to be brought into there. And then you see this kind of overview of who is found in there. You've got their serial number, their residence stuff, where they enlisted, what year they enlisted, what branch, what year they were born. Usually it just gives the last two, so you kind of gotta think about it. And then if you click on view record, it'll give you a little bit more information specifically on what they did, what branch they were a part of, maybe what education they had, marital status, all kinds of great stuff that you can learn a little bit more about them. So they've got, like I said, lots of other different military things in here. So they've got Civil War stuff, they've got World War II stuff, World War II, they've got Korean War, I think they've got Vietnam as well. So just kind of random collections of records that maybe you'll find your ancestor in if you want to search. Questions so far? We've got a couple more things and then we'll wrap up.
National Archives demo, the real version, I imagine that's a 4.2 type.
No, that's completely free. That National Archives site is completely free. The demo was just me demonstrating it for you. Yeah, you can access the National Archives website from anywhere. Any ideas about Fold 3 searches for publications? My father was a cartoonist in World War II and knows artist stationed in Savannah, Georgia during the war. I have sketches with some notations. I don't know what you're asking for. I would search under World War II and then look at specific publications. I'm not sure which would feature an artist or if there's any specific publications specifically for artists, but go and search in Fold 3 and see what they have. Again, not everything is online, unfortunately. So you might get more additional records offline. All right. There's also going to be location-specific repositories or resources depending on where your ancestors served or where they lived. Some have some really great information online, or they might have some great stuff offline. So I mentioned earlier the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. We have that in Madison, a really great resource. It covers all the different wars. If your veteran was affiliated in with Wisconsin in any way, whether they served with Wisconsin or they lived here or they were born here, you might be able to find some resources on them through the Wisconsin Veterans Museum site. So this is where I found a photo of my Civil War ancestor. It's the only photo I have ever found of him. They've also got some great learning and other resources on here. So if you go under learning and research, you see they've got a couple rosters over here. So they've got a Civil War one, Spanish American, World War I, and some Medal of Honor recipients. So you can again click on it and then type in that person's name and click search. And you can see then I find my second great grandfather here, where his address was, what his serial number is, branch of service, and what unit he was involved in. There's also this link where you can request more information. It's going to then send an email to the staff at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, and then you can get what information they might have. So those cards that I showed you an example of earlier that I got from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, that's how I got those, was requesting more information that way. There's also a spot where you can search for the different things that they've digitized online. So again, if you go to this learning and research spot, you can search people, objects, archives. They've got different battle flags and regimental histories for the Civil War on here. But I just clicked on search people and I put in my ancestor's name. So you can see there's a couple different results in here. But here is Ira. So it says a little bit about him right here. It talks about this post that he was a part of. And then if I scroll down here, look at, there's that picture that I showed earlier. So it's from about 1900 and it says, you know, what unit he was affiliated with. And it tells me a little bit more about, you know, this, and I can get a copy of it right there. So how cool is that? You might find a picture of your ancestor in here. I wish every state had a veterans museum like we did. You know, I'm not sure about the other states, but some states might also have a great veterans museum. We've also got some other national societies like the Daughters of American Revolution or the Sons of American Revolution. Like I showed you earlier, an example of the application file that they have on Ancestry. The DAR also has a great website where you can search about the different Revolutionary War patrons or the people who were DAR members under that person. So under here, you'd go to dar.org. And then the GRS is kind of where they've got their genealogy things listed here. So you can search by ancestor. So this is where you put in that Revolutionary War person's name. So if I know this is the name or what state he would have served in, or what state he would have died in, or what year he would have died in, I could put that information in here to narrow down the results. And then you can see kind of like a little preview snapshot of that person to see, okay, is this the right person or is this the right person? You'd click on their name to learn a little bit more. So it says, oh, this guy, he was actually a Quaker. So we're questioning if he was actually in the militia or not. So you know, if I want to file with the DAR, I probably don't want to file under this guy. I want to find if I have another patriot to file under, because I might not get approved under this guy. But you can see their spouse, and then you can see down here the different names of the people that would have applied. They've got kind of ID numbers for the members who would have applied. And then you can purchase their application and the supplemental materials that they would have used for their application. If I want to become a DAR member, I might purchase that and then use some of their information or some of the resources that they used to become a member of the DAR if I would like to. They've kind of got like a little legend down here. So what I would recommend is finding one that's going to be as close to your actual line. So as you can see, there's a couple different children of this person. Well, there's just 2 of them listed. So if one of these isn't mine, I might pick one that definitely has the supporting documentation available. Or pick one that's going to be from the child that I descend from as well. They've also got some websites for some specific units or specific regiments, or they have reunion groups as well. Again, it's going to vary depending on all the different wars and different resources different states have for their veterans. You can also use WorldCat, like I showed you earlier, WorldCat, where you can search for specific materials on a specific war or a specific regiment or unit. And again, you can sometimes interlibrary loan stuff. So like I mentioned, I searched for the 47th Illinois Infantry, where my Civil War ancestor served. I got like 3 different resources. I got these different history books or different diaries, all about this different infantry unit. So I could learn a little bit more about what that infantry did, how it was organized, what battles they were involved in, what they were doing on a daily or weekly basis, to learn a little bit more about what my ancestor experienced. Again, you can check some of those digital library sites like HathiTrust, Digital Public Library of America, and Internet Archive. They've got lots of digitized regimental histories or other digitized materials that might be related to military service. Again, refer back to our talk that we did last month on city directories, and I've got demonstrations of how to use those sites if you're not familiar with using them. But I would use those sites to search for my ancestor's name. I would search for a specific town or a location. I would search for a specific war or a specific battle. Like if I really want to learn more about the Battle of Chickamauga, I would type in Battle of Chickamauga in these sites to see what digitized stuff might be on there to help me learn more about that specific battle my ancestor was in, for example. If you have a Civil War ancestor or you have a suspected Civil War ancestor, they do have a separate database to the National Park Service that you can go ahead and search depending on if they were a soldier or a sailor. So if you think they were a soldier, you could type in their name right here. So I could do John Powers, for example. And I can see there's a lot of results for John Powers. So that's not super helpful for me. But if you look over here on the left-hand side, again, they've got some filters. So I think my John Powers probably would have served through Ohio, because that's where I know he lived at this time around the Civil War, thanks to my census research. So now I can see a fewer results over here, and I can kind of see like a little snapshot over here of like who, these might be. Well, I know my ancestor, his middle initial was S. So maybe I'm going to click on this guy and read a little bit more. And then you can click into the unit and learn a little bit more about that unit. You can see what company that person might have been involved in and then start researching a little bit more to see, can I find more information on this person to confirm that this is my ancestor or not? But the really great part is it lists out kind of when these were organized or where they were organized from, what battles they were involved in, things like that. So this will help you, again, create that timeline that you might want to learn a little bit more about what your ancestor service was like and where this unit was at a specific time. This is also a really great site, this American Battlefield Trust. So you can learn a lot about Civil War, Revolutionary War, and War of 1812 in here. They've got some great resources under this Learn tab. So each tab is kind of Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Civil War. So depending on which of those 3 wars you want to learn a little bit more about, they've just got some overviews, or they've got specific facts, or they've got different little areas of interest, or maps, or articles, or different battle things that you might want to learn about. Or I can just go right here to this search box and start typing in a specific thing. So say I want to search the Battle of Chickamauga. And then I can see all these results about the Battle of Chickamauga to try to learn a little bit more about it. I can click on any of these things and learn a little bit more about like when this battle happened, what forces were engaged, all these casualties, all this information. They've got sometimes little charts and graphs or pictures in here where I can learn a lot about this specific battle, perhaps, that my ancestor was involved in. So they've got lots of great resources in here that you can explore a lot more. There's also a whole Civil War video that we did a couple years ago with Russell Horton from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. So he talked all about how to research someone who served in the Civil War. So you can watch that video on our YouTube channel. Got a link to that in your handout. We've also got one on World War II veterans. So if you're looking at researching a World War II veteran a little bit more in depth, Russell also did this video for us a couple years ago, where you can learn a little bit more about that DD 214 and all about the different resources there are available for World War II veterans. Again, that link is in your handout. There's a great World War I research guide that Deborah Dudek, who is an awesome researcher, we've hosted her before at the library as well. But she wrote a whole guide on how to research World War I genealogy, and it's completely free that you can go online and download a copy of this to read through and learn a little bit more about how to research a World War I veteran, completely free. We've also got a physical copy. It's an older edition than what's available online, but if you would prefer a physical copy to hold, we do have it available at the library as well. It's just a little bit older, unfortunately. We've also got a military bounty land book that talks a little bit more about that bounty land that, remember, our ancestors might have been given as a result of their service or as a reward for their service. So this walks you through all of it. It's not specifically at Appleton, but you can put a hold on it and get it sent to Appleton because one of the other library owns it. You can also search in our catalog for different battles or different information on the different wars to learn a little bit more. So for example, I know one of my ancestors was involved in the Battle of Waterloo, and I don't remember learning about that in history, even though it was a pretty major battle. So I might come to our library's website. I'd click on our library catalog to be brought into the catalog. And then right up here, I would search Battle of Waterloo. And then I can see all the various books that we have available. I can put them on hold and get them sent to the library. If you want to click on it, you can learn a little bit more about what it is. So this is like a detailed account. So that sounds great. That sounds like something I might want to check out. If you want to see if it's available at Appleton, you just click on availability. I can see this one's at Seymour, so I would want to put it on hold and get it sent to Appleton for me to be able to read and check out. Again, you can search any different keyword or topic or subject. I can type in World War II. And learn about all the various books and resources we have. We've even got videos or audiobooks, things like that, that you can search for, that you can check out through the library. The National Archives website has a lot of really great resources too for learning more about specific records that they have and how to request those. So again, they've got a whole link in your handout for you. There's this whole huge download. It's 136 pages, all about the different military service records at the National Archives, because even in 2.5 hours, I cannot cover it all for you. So feel free to download that or print it and learn a little bit more. Then they've also got a video series, so including past videos of past years. So you can see earlier this year, they had one on civilian records. They've got basic military records at the National Archives from the Revolutionary War to 1917. They've got civilian conservation corps records, Korean War records. So they've got all these different videos. They had one on the 1973 fire. So you can see their series from this year. All you have to do is kind of click on these videos, and there's different videos or different links depending on the different topics. If you want to look at past years, they've got a link right up here for past years where you can look at all the different past years. So they've got 2023. You can see all the various records that they have here. And then again, find the videos and then watch them. So they're usually about an hour or a little bit longer, and you can learn a little bit more about that specific topic from an expert from the National Archives. Then, if you have a local veteran, we also have this really great database through the library called the Veterans Grave Registration Database. So in order to get to that, again, you'd want to go to apl.org. Under eLibrary, it's going to be one of our APL created ones. So you can go ahead and click on that. And you can see right down here, Veterans Grave Registration. So this includes about 500 of our Fox River area veterans from War of 1812 to World War I. And what you would do is you would start typing in that person's name. And you can see as you start typing, it gives you an example or like what you can find in the database. So I'm going to try to find Ira. And I can start typing Ira, and I know my ancestor's middle initial wasn't C, it was JS. So now I can click on that and then click on search. And then I can see this veteran's grave registration card that was created, where it's going to give some information on his Civil War service, when he enlisted, when he died, where he's buried, all that kind of great stuff. Because he's a local veteran, we have information on him. So this is just our Appleton area veterans, unfortunately.
You say up to know what you're talking about, Allegheny?
They're primarily Appleton. There's a little bit of Little Chute and Kokana. So it listed on the website like what cemeteries it covers as well. So if you know specifically that they were buried at Riverside Cemetery or whatever, they would likely be in there. International, so if you do have an ancestor who served with something other than the United States Army, again, start with the Family Search Wiki. Just type in German military records or whatever. So that's what I did. I typed in Germany military records in the Family Search Wiki, and it will give you a little bit of information. So it'll give you some links to resources that you can search online, talk to you a little bit about military records and what might be available or what might not be available, what types of records. Maybe if they served in different countries, that because border changes, it wasn't always Germany at that time, and learn more. So that's where I would start because I have no clue about any of the other international ones. So for example, I have an ancestor, he was a cavalryman. He served with Napoleon Bonaparte, and then he then switched sides and then fought in the Battle of Waterloo and defeated Napoleon. So he is one of the few Napoleonic soldiers buried in Wisconsin, and that's my 4th great grandfather. So he thankfully was honored with this really cool memorial tombstone where I have a little bit more information about him, thanks to the Menasha Historical Society. Unfortunately, a lot of those international military records that might be about your ancestor are going to be offline. The access is going to depend on all the various countries and what their record availability is, and if they're willing to let external researchers have those. We do have a couple international record collections on Ancestry, either the World Edition or that Library Edition where you don't have to have that premium subscription. There's also a few on Fold3 and Family Search. If they immigrated to the United States after their service, you might want to see what information you can find on them in the United States. So maybe in a newspaper in the United States, they talked a little bit about their military service, or maybe one of their descendants did as well. So good luck with military stuff internationally. I'm not sure where to direct you other than Family Search Wiki. Those could all be their own sessions. But that's what I got for you. So our next session is going to be August 27th. We're going to be talking all about church records and how to locate those and what kind of great stuff you can find in church records. In the meantime, we've got our Find Your Ancestor session on August 8th, all about using those website generated hints, like those shaky leaves that you find on Ancestry, how to use those more effectively, how to make sure you're making sure that's your actual ancestor before you accept those hints. And then just quickly, I wanted to share photos of my veteran ancestors that I talked about today. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any more questions. Thankfully, my voice held out. I was a little worried there at the beginning, guys. I didn't think it was going to hold out. All right, let's see if we got any questions online. Many people now opt for cremation. How to find this information through Funeral Parlor? Yeah, you'd have to know what funeral home they would have been cremated through. So that might be in their obituary. That's where I would start. Yeah, and unfortunately, some people aren't putting obituaries in the newspaper either, so it's difficult. Yeah, well, obituaries are just so expensive to put in the newspaper too, and it's just unfortunate. Yeah. Yeah, even a short paragraph is hundreds of dollars, unfortunately. So I don't see any other questions, but if anybody has any more questions, feel free to send an email, or as you start diving into stuff, feel free to send me an email. And thanks everyone for hanging in here. I know we went super long. I appreciate you guys hanging in here. Take care.
very much.